Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Wednesday, June 26th.
Totally committed to spending the countless number of hours that are needed to improve our system.
New leadership now in place at the Chicago School Board. Property taxes are expected to jump in the northern and central parts of Chicago. Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi is here to share his roadmap. Is Alderman Carrie Austin under federal investigation because of a sweetheart real estate deal? Our Spotlight Politics team looks at that and other top stories.
When the finished product is complete, we'll have a trainer be ready to hit the CTA tracks.
Inside the Headwish facility that brought railcar production back to Chicago. The British are coming, a revolutionary look at America's founding story. And Geoffrey Baer deposits some knowledge about buildings left behind by the banking panics of the Great Depression. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Ponce. A spat over spit sidelines a Chicago bar employee. Paris Schutz has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Paris.
Phil, that's right. A Chicago cocktail bar says it has put an employee on leave after she allegedly spit on President Trump's son, Eric Trump. The incident allegedly took place last night at the West Loop hotspot, the Aviary. A Chicago police spokesperson says the department assisted the Secret Service in tending to the matter. But in a statement, the Aviary says, quote, no customer should ever be spit on. More broadly, the online discussion about the incident is troubling. Hundreds of people are calling for the demise of our business, threatening our employees and posting fake reviews. They're wrong to do so based on the actions of one individual. No charges have been filed yet in this case. Not guilty. That is the plea from a mother and daughter accused of killing Marlon Ochoa Lopez and ripping her baby out of her womb. The baby eventually died after a week in intensive care. Clarissa Figueroa and her daughter Desiree are charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and could face additional charges from county prosecutors. A third defendant, Pieter Bobak, is charged with concealment of homicide and obstruction of justice. There are reports emerging out of Houston today on the state of a 2-year-old girl who was struck by a foul ball during the Cubs and Astros game last month. An attorney for the family of the girl says she suffered a skull fracture and a seizure and is still under examination to determine the long-term effects of her injury. The incident happened when Cubs outfielder Albert Almora hit a foul ball into the stands. Almora was visibly distraught and recently said he hasn't yet spoken with the little girl's family. Last week, the White Sox announced they'd become the first team in the majors to extend the netting behind home plate all the way to the right and left field foul poles to prevent a similar incident at Guaranteed Rate Field. A longtime Chicago broadcast journalist has died. Russ Ewing worked in the business for the better part of 3 decades at Channels 5 and 7. Here he is on WTTW in a program about gang crime from 1985. Ewing was known for his extensive reporting on crime and his unique ability to get criminal suspects to surrender. Ewing was 95 years old. As for the weather, partly cloudy tonight with a low around 68, and then tomorrow a chance of showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Otherwise, mostly sunny with a high near 90. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Paris. Chicago Mayor Lightfoot decided to keep Rahm Emanuel appointed Janice Jackson as chief of city schools. But Jackson now has to work with a whole new school board. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Binnicky attended the first meeting of the new Board of Education today. And Amanda, it's early on, clearly, but you see any changes?
Well, Phil, Mayor Lightfoot wiped the slate clean of past Board of Education members, and instead of filling it back up with corporate exec types, she instead has put on the Board of Education community activists, educators, parents, and yes, early on, this board is making changes, starting with some structural basics like live streaming committees. Watching a school board meeting may be the definition of boredom for some, but there's definitely interest. Let me tell you, there was a line of people waiting to get in to watch today's proceedings, and then those who did get in were largely in a spillover room.
Even if we disagree or do not share the same opinion, it is necessary to hear the diverse voices of this board Our diversity is a reflection of the diversity of our schools. This tone of transparency will be the cornerstone of our leadership. It is critically important in order to build and maintain trust with the communities we serve.
Other changes: meetings will be live translated into Spanish. Board members will chair new committees, and those will meet in neighborhoods. And rather than waiting until the very end after potentially prolonged closed-door executive sessions, the new board president, Miguel Del Valle, says votes on new policies will be highlighted at the start of meetings and voted on after the public comment portion, so giving time for folks to weigh in. With more time to talk and with more public feedback from board members, the president also warned that meetings are bound to last longer. Again, something that's groan-inducing to some, but music to the ears of those who want more transparency and engagement.
So Lori Lightfoot, when she ran for mayor, said she was in favor of an elected school board, and yet she appointed all these board members. Where does the whole notion of an elected Chicago school board stand? So
she did run on an elected school board, but then she fought against the sole proposal that gained traction during the now adjourned legislative session that would have tripled the CPS board from 7 to 21 members. The mayor said that'd be too unwieldy. We haven't seen her publicly produce an alternative, but at least one of her chosen board members is wanting and willing to lose her post by putting it in the choice that is in the hands of voters.
I, in fact, believe very strongly in the importance of delivering greater democracy to the city of Chicago through an elected representative school board. In the meantime, however, I do want to say that it's an honor and a privilege to serve the students, families, and educators and support staff of Chicago Public Schools in this capacity.
So there's been no action on the prospect of an elected school board, but did this school board take any significant action today?
Yes, Phil. Now, school may be out for summer for students, lucky them, but this board was busy, just like we reporters. The most controversial change that they took up: changes to the school quality rating policy. Those are metrics that are supposed to assess just that, the quality of schools, or their performance anyway. Ratings can be a big deal for parents who stress out about getting their children into certain higher rated ones.
And one of the things that I've said continuously is we have to move away from this obsession over a handful of schools. Every community deserves a high quality school, and students deserve access where they don't have to travel far.
There's frustration, though, about how the district is rating school quality using factors like attendance. Critics argue could bring down the ratings for a school where truancy may be an issue because of factors like high poverty and violence.
I mean, the elephant in the room is that some of these, ratings are used, as you say, make decisions about actions. And, like I've been involved in many situations where Marshall would get compared to a Whitney Young in terms of, who's providing a quality education. For me, a quality education is meeting students where they are, nurturing them where they need to be.
That policy did end up passing with the board member we just saw, Member Truss, voting no. Another member abstained. The Chicago Teachers Union had tried to pressure the new board to vote against this revised ratings policy. The CTU says even with the changes, the metrics are flawed, putting low scores, that is, putting certain schools at risk of fewer resources. The union's calling for the ratings policy to be eliminated completely. In general, there was a heavy CTU presence at this initial board meeting. That's as the union's negotiating a new contract with the Lightfoot administration. The union wants more money for nurses, school counselors, librarians.
Librarians not only curate a library with culturally relevant titles, but they also teach our students. They learn STEM skills, they learn critical thinking skills, they learn research skills, and they keep our students on a path of lifelong learning and a love of reading.
In other action, the new board also approved new bylaws that encourage therapeutic responses versus punishment if students are caught with drugs. Also, guidance for how principals are supposed to deal with students caught vaping. That's a growing trend among youth. And there's more on that, Phil, on our website.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Carol Marine and a look at exactly what is happening with your property taxes. Carol.
Phil, thank you. Cook County property owners will be getting new property tax bills in the next few days. Depending on where you live, you may see a steep increase, especially if your residential or commercial property is in the northern or central parts of the city of Chicago. These properties were assessed by the office of former Cook County Assessor Joe Baer, the predecessor to the current Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi. Kaegi's office is currently assessing properties in the north suburbs in preparation for next year's bills, but Fritz Kaegi joins us now, and that does not stop people from flooding your office with calls, correct?
Well, that's correct. And Carol, some people sometimes think that as an assessor, I must like property taxes, and I don't want people to be confused on that. I don't like them as much as anyone else, but we have to finance government, and our job is to divide up the bill that has been presented by the taxing bodies based on our assessments, and our work will be reflected in folks' tax bills starting next year.
So what are they saying?
Well, what folks are saying is that they really appreciate a lot of the changes that we put in place so far as assessors. So one of the first things we did is we put in an ethics executive order.
No, actually, that wasn't my question. I didn't say it very well.
Okay.
What are they saying about their property tax bills?
Oh, the property tax bills for this year. Well, there's a wide range. On the north side, they are up. I think that reflects appreciation in the housing market, also a catch-up from substandard practices that have been going on. And in the last year of the administration, they used some of the learnings from the Civic Consulting Alliance that brought in a new model, and there were some improvements on what was done before. So that's being reflected on the north side. On the south side, property tax bills have kind of stayed flat. Housing markets have been mixed down there, and some of them had been overassessed. So the changes sometimes a reflection not only what's happened in the last 3 years, but also reflect an artifact of things that might have not worked well previously.
So I have at least heard of one account of someone whose tax bill was skyrocketing more than 100% from last year. Is that likely to be some of those things? Are there mistakes potentially being made in some of these bills?
It's always possible that there's a mistake. We're fewer than 250 people trying to assess 1.8 million properties. Sometimes we don't have up-to-date information about people's homes, and there can always be errors. So what people should do is when you get your assessment notice, look at the estimated market value we have for it and see if it's wrong. If we have the characteristics of house you're wrong, number of bedrooms and type of construction, that can be a source of error. And then look at other homes like yours in the neighborhood to see how they're assessed, and that's how you can see if you're being treated equitably and fairly.
And do you need a lawyer if you say, oh my God, this is really wrong, what do I do?
I'd like to make really clear that you do not. The greatest expert on your house is you. And if we're making a mistake, no one's going to be a better position to correct that than you. So correct the record if we have information that's not accurate about your home, go and correct it. You probably know what homes are like yours in the neighborhood. Go and see those and compare how they're treated with us, and then bring them to us. One thing that we have done in my administration is we have made it completely anonymous to our analysts as to what law firm, if you do choose to hire a law firm, is handling the case. So all appeals rest on the merits and the data, not on the identity of who might be handling an appeal.
So today's tax bills are higher in the north part of the city, by and large, lower in the southern part of the city. Could this be an example of Joe Baer, your predecessor, responding to the fierce criticism of being unfair to small homeowners, too fair to corporate commercial interests, and he tried to equalize it in this last iteration?
Well, I think it's an incontrovertible fact that the assessor's office last year brought in the Civic Consulting Alliance and outside experts to try to do a residential model to improve on what they've been doing before that have been pointed out in all the investigations, in all the studies. And I think we saw some initial improvements last year on where it was, but I think there's a lot of work to be done yet. Otherwise, you'd have to ask him, to put him on the couch to ask him why he truly did something.
And what we're seeing in this graphic, the pink and the blue areas, the north part of the city, that is experiencing the upward trajectory in tax bills versus the southern part. Our current assessments, even if they're fairer, going to be better overall for the taxpayer? Could you be fairer and still pay a lot more?
Well, the standard for fairness and for measuring whether we're doing our job is how well did we estimate the value of homes that actually transacted in the market. That's how you measure whether we're doing a good job. And so our job under the law is to estimate the market value of homes. If there's a systematic bias in that, we're releasing all the data to make ourselves accountable for whether we're doing a good job on that. We're really focused on making sure that we're taking into account all the data that we have about markets and home characteristics and holding ourselves accountable. We're releasing a ton of data with each of our new assessments to see how good a job are we doing on estimating the value of homes.
So you're the new guy, you're a rookie, first time in, and you created a couple of firestorms. One of them had to do with going to county commissioners and saying, could you lend us some of your employees to handle some of the volume of taxpayer calls? The commissioners pushed back, but the inspector general did too, saying that's goofing around with Shackman and patronage, and you can't do it. Was that a rookie mistake?
We don't think it was a rookie mistake. We're trying to be resourceful, addressing a really big need, which is that we knew we'd have a crush of people coming in, and there was a past precedent. The Board of Review had lent employees to us before during peak season so that we can handle the peaks. We're really concerned about providing good service and also, following previous precedent. But because the board is taking appeals a little bit earlier this year, we said, well, since we have been asked to train county commissioner staff on processing property tax appeals and constituent service, and we have this peak need, why don't we invite them to volunteer to do what they're doing with the Board of Review? The IG said, you shouldn't do this, and so we're not going to do it. So we'll be resourceful, find other ways to be resourceful and handle the big crush that comes in July.
The other place where you came into the crosshairs was, and this is fulfilling a major campaign promise, is you went to the legislature to propose a law in Springfield that would compel big commercial interests to disclose some of the income that they derive from those big properties. But those also happen to be the kind of people represented by House Speaker Mike Madigan's law firm and Alderman Ed Burke's law firm, and that bill ended up dead. Was it killed by Madigan?
Well, we don't know. Speaker Madigan said that he recused himself from voting and negotiations on the bill, and we take him at his word. What we do know about the bill is that it passed by a bipartisan supermajority out of the Senate. It had a terrific coalition of backers, including a lot of people from the business community. The business community is divided. A lot of them have a vision of our market here, which is borrowing from what's thriving in other parts of the country, having universal rules and predictability and transparency that makes it work for everyone, regardless of your identity and your proximity to power. So we had a terrific coalition on the House side. We had more than half of the House Democratic Caucus as co-sponsors, many members of House leadership as co-sponsors. But we didn't get a vote.
But it still got dead.
Right, and you'll have to ask House leadership as to why we did not get a vote.
But you're going to try it again next session?
We absolutely will. The voters of Illinois, homeowners of Illinois, the people who live here expect property tax reform. This is one of the areas of unfinished business from the last session. There were momentous changes in the last session, and we applaud them. We got another important piece of legislation passed, automatic renewal of the senior exemption, and we thank the Speaker for letting that happen. That had languished for over a decade. So we're really optimistic that property tax reform that borrows from best practices in 17 other states, that has so much support, will be a really terrific item for the governor to get involved and have another accomplishment.
If it gets to the floor. So you're one of those guys that nobody sent. And so you arrive, and you arrived not with the support of County Board President Toni Preckwinkle. She was for your predecessor and your opponent, Joe Barrios. She's now made the surprise decision that she's going to seek another term when this 4-year term is up. Are the two of you on better paper these days, you and the board president?
Actually, we're really proud of the cooperation that we've had together since we've come into office. I think she appreciates our focus on delivering solid changes. You know, she helped us get involved with the Civic Consulting Alliance and having a very successful transition. I think a lot of people have noted that our transition was really successful. We're working really hard on an IT implementation together with her, where the contractor that the county has hired is not delivering fast enough, and we've worked really hard to deliver together on that. She and the board supported our bill down in Springfield unanimously. Larry Suffredin was there in the room with us hammering out the bill, so we couldn't be more pleased with the cooperation we're getting with Tony. And by the way, Tony lives a block away from the house that I grew up in, so I'm proud as a Hyde Parker to be cooperating with her.
So you promised when you went in that you were going to get rid of all employees hired by nepotism, and Joe Berrios had a sizable number of his family members on the payroll. Have you gotten rid of all the nepotism?
We've gotten rid of all the Berrios relatives and other families out there that would have had folks in the assessor's office before we came in. And we brought in a really terrific team of people, 25 people, a person who'd led lending for a major Chicago bank, a person who'd run assessor's offices in the state of Indiana, which has a really good assessor system. We brought in David Orr's chief of staff, Sarah Garza-Resnick, to run our office, great reform record. Annette Moore, who's moving mountains with Shackman, trying to bring us into compliance with Shackman. We were really proud of the group that we brought, and none of them are related to me.
So, so you've fulfilled that campaign promise, it would appear. You've also said you weren't taking political donations from staff or from property lawyers or appraisers. Does that still hold true?
That's correct. So on the first day we came into office, we put into place the Ethics Executive Order, which extends that promise not to take donations from people practicing before the office. We put into place a visitor's log, which discloses all visits to our senior management, and we invite the public to inspect who's coming. And we put in rules that publish them for the first time for people practicing before the office. Appraisals have to be done by an actual appraiser now that a bank would accept.
Is it fair to say, in the 5 seconds that are left, there's still a steep learning curve in this for you?
Well, we have to improve our data, and the data bill is an important part of that, and we also can work to staff up the office so we can gather better data. That's our big to-do.
Well, Fritz Kaegi, thank you for joining us. We'll be talking to you, I hope, in the future.
Certainly, happy to be back.
More on Chicago tonight, just ahead. Stay with us.
Still to come on Chicago tonight, a sneak peek at the new generation of CTA train cars. They're being produced here in Chicago. An award-winning historian shares the gripping story of the Revolutionary War in a new book. And what bank building survived the Great Depression? We promise you won't lose interest in tonight's encore presentation of Ask Geoffrey. But first, another former Chicago alderman is heading to prison. This as more details emerge about the investigation into a powerful current alderman. Here to break all of this down and other top stories from the world of politics is our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicky, Paris Schutz, and Carol Marine. Well, let's talk first about Alderman Kerry Austin.
You don't want to talk about the Revolutionary War, Phil?
We'll get to that.
It's not too soon to talk about that?
If time permits. Okay. I think they're still sorting that one out. Oh, ha ha. Kerry Austin, who is she? What's her reputation? Tell us about her background.
Kerry Austin, from the 34th Ward on the South Side, replaced her late husband, Lemuel Austin. She is the second longest serving, I think, alderman. Is that right?
Yeah, she started in '94. So second longest to Alderman Ed Burke.
Long time, old time politician. She comes out of the Daley years, and she believes that if you can't take care of your family and friends with jobs, then what good are you? And so she is not what we would call a progressive, Not a lot happened in her committee. It was pretty much rubber stamped for Richard M. Daley, rubber stamped for Rahm Emanuel.
So what do we know about the charges or the possible areas of investigation that the feds are looking into?
Well, Phil, there have been various reports leaked out in the last several days, including one from NBC5, talking about a real estate deal that she had in October. The home she currently lives in West Pullman, she has a federal FHA mortgage for about $231,000 on this piece of property that she owns down there that is apparently worth about $300,000 or $400,000. And this developer, JTD Development, they had gotten TIF money from the city to develop this tract of land. So we don't really know if the investigation centers on this. There have been other reports about her son, Kenny Austin, about various people that she's had on her payroll. So the feds are casting a wide net, and ultimately we may find a different locus in this investigation.
Something to keep in mind here, yeah, Phil, is just that as the feds begin to look, who knows what they may find, and then that can begin to pull another thread, another avenue that prosecutors will then go down, that agents will then seek. And if you're doing something wrong, then there are plenty of ways in which they can go down that road.
But the feds have been looking for a while. This is not a new investigation, we don't believe. No. And upzoning, when you zone your property to allow for more development, makes that property more valuable, and that was an ordinance that she introduced.
Paris, the fact, as I recall, she's one of the people who, when she found out that Alderman Solis had been wearing a wire, she was seemed particularly upset.
Said something like to the effect, "You don't go against the family."
Well, is it safe to assume that that there might be other aldermen, not besides Kerry Austin, that the feds might be looking at in light of the length of time that Alderman Solis was wearing a wire, which is a couple of years?
It is safe to assume that, Phil. It is not safe to throw out any names, so I won't put out any names, although certain names are bandied about, and not just city council members, but other public office holders, former office holders. There's so many rumors about what the feds are looking at right now, and there's a stepped-up focus on public corruption. There are a couple prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office that focus on this that I'm told kind of are going after this with a zeal that they haven't seen in a long time. I don't know if it's the new U.S. Attorney John Lausch that's sort of made this a directive for them, because a lot of these investigations started long before John Lausch ever got onto the scene.
And the fact that Mayor Lightfoot is a former federal prosecutor, is it safe to assume that she still has some informal communication with the U.S. Attorney's Office that sort of gives her at least a sense of what the U.S. Attorney's Office is doing regarding corruption?
Certainly, she has a sense of what they're doing, what they'll be looking for, how they operate. We don't know that she has any sort of inside scoop. Presumably, prosecutors play very carefully by the rules. They don't want word to get out about just who they're looking into in case that changes somebody's behavior.
And yet, she issued a statement the other day to the effect of, regarding the U.S. Attorney's Office, go get them, guys and gals.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are also, in a sense, her former colleagues. So it's not just that she has an understanding of how the office works, but there are certainly informal relationships. We don't know what could be happening there.
We
could assume.
We assume. Let's just say yes, Phil, that she has a very good sense, either psychically or because she's got some information. But let's remember too that when she says go get them, Willie Cochran of the 20th Ward was just sentenced. Willie Cochran, whose two predecessors, Cliff Kelly and Arenda Troutman, went to prison from the 20th Ward.
There have been 30 aldermen convicted on officially related actions, 30 in the past 47 years.
1/10 of them from the 20th Ward.
Cochran's attempt to stay out of prison, which he did not get, was, well, hey guys, it hasn't worked to send people to prison before. That hasn't deterred anybody, including evidently himself.
It's not a deterrent. On that, he apparently is quite right.
Although his reaction to his prison sentence was quite bizarre. At first, he shows a little bit of remorse, and then he says, you know what, I should have never pled guilty, and this was unfair.
He expressed remorse in court. But then outside, speaking to cameras,
But he's been bizarre throughout this entire process. First deciding to cooperate, then not cooperating, then pleading guilty and not guilty. It's been totally schizophrenic.
Let's talk about Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle, because she has reversed her previous announcement that she's not going to run again. Why do you think, what are you hearing in terms of why she changed her mind?
She's no longer quite, one could say, at the top of her game after really being trounced in the mayoral race, but still, she is head of the Cook County Democratic Party. There's a lot of power that comes along with that position, so why would she want to give that up? She says it's that she has a focus on public health, criminal justice issues, a lot of unfinished business. Let me just say, she will be, 75 come if she were to be reelected in 2022, and I'm going to brag here. Mick Jagger last night, he's 75. He's bouncing around all over the place.
Talking about Ed Burke and so forth.
That's no problem.
Carol, your insights into why Toni Preckwinkle has changed her mind.
Nothing makes you more irrelevant than announcing your retirement 4 years before it takes place. And so, trounced by Lori Lightfoot, yes. Wounded, yes. Toni Preckwinkle's going to fight her way back. And let's remember that Jesse White, the Secretary of State, is, I think, 80, certainly, and so...
And keeps threatening retirement and never does it as well.
And she's got a few years to go.
Can I just add, yes, you're right, Carol. I mean, she might have been a lame duck for 3.5 years if she hadn't done this. She threw a fundraiser yesterday. She's raising money, getting the machine back up and going. But I was told that she told a number of top people in support of hers that she intended to run for mayor and serve only one term as mayor. And then she also said that this would be her last term as Cook County Board President. So I do really think she loves the fight. I do really think she loves the job. You know, it could be a sense of, some people don't ever want to retire, and work is life for them.
Being mayor is different than being Cook County Board President. They are both certainly important and prestigious positions, but there is a lot more scrutiny for the mayor than there is the Cook County Board President.
Carol, we are almost out of time. Let's switch just for a beat to national politics. Tonight is the first of 2 encounters between Democratic candidates for the presidency and a panel of moderators. What should people look for tonight?
Oh, it makes my head hurt. You know, Phil, you've moderated things. I've moderated things. When you've got 3 moderators and 10 candidates, you're going to look for one moment of clarity on one issue if you can get it from the largest number of those candidates. But I have no idea. I'm looking for both a food fight and also a moment that may somehow be pivotal.
And it's just part 1, right? There's the 10 out of 20 candidates.
Exactly. The second group of candidates shows up tomorrow.
Hard to think that voters would really be able to make some kind of definitive judgment right now.
Get a big bag of popcorn.
And a scorecard.
A bit early, isn't it? Amanda, Paris, Carol, thank you all very much. Railcar manufacturing is back in Chicago after some 50 years. Production on the new series of CTA train cars recently got underway on the city's southeast side, and Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg got a tour.
CRRC Seafong America's brand new facility was built after the company was awarded the CTA contract in 2016. Workers spent a month training in China, where the company's based. Earlier this month, components for the new rail cars started getting delivered. Production manager Brian Vasquez gave us a tour.
This is the beginning and the end of our process right here on the gantry crane area.
While the contracts faced criticism because it went to a Chinese-owned company, CRRC Seafong says there aren't any firms in the U.S. that make rail cars, and it stresses that 70% of the components are sourced from American companies.
Once the car shell comes into the facility, we'll put it onto the traverser and we'll move it into whatever lane we need it to.
The 380,000 square foot facility has myriad different stations for each stage of production: painting, assembly, weighing, and lots of testing. One station is set up to replicate the dimensions of the narrowest places CTA trains navigate.
We're making sure that when the car pulls into a platform or if it pulls into a tunnel or something like that, that the car shell, the components, the hoses, and the cables do not touch anything.
Each station is set up so employees can work simultaneously on the interior and the underbelly. Vasquez notes that unlike larger regional rail cars that have lots of space-hogging components like a heating and cooling system on the roof, the CTA is different.
With this particular car, all of those components are underfloor. So it's kind of like a massive jigsaw underneath to figure out how to get all those major components underfloor at one time.
Inside the car, he points out some features that riders are more likely to notice day to day, including what the experience will be like in the saloon.
And the saloon is where the CTA riders will be. We have the traverse seats and the longitudinal seats just like in the old CTAs, ones that you sit this way or ones that you sit this way.
The new seats are also cantilevered above the floor of the car instead of sitting on a pedestal to help address the challenge of cleaning the car on a tight timetable.
So that those cleaning folks can get in and out quickly and they can get everything now. They can, instead of having to go underneath and around a pedestal, they just from one end to the other.
Another new feature, more cameras in each car visible to both operator and passengers.
So we'll have a screen up in that corner there, and you'll be able to see all the cameras and what they're viewing at the time.
Production on the first 2 rail cars is already underway. They expect to finish the first 10 by the end of 2019 and then hand them off to the CTA for a full year of putting them through their paces, testing them in summer, fall, winter, and spring.
Once the CTA approves the new rail cars, the CRRC facility can go into full production. It's contracted to produce 846 cars over the next 10 years.
Right now there's about 73 or so employees. We keep adding more, which is nice because the production is getting started. At full capacity, that number is still unknown at this point. Once those prototypes are tested and we get the thumbs up, we'll really ramp up the recruiting.
The company focused on hiring locally with a recruiting campaign it says started in the facility's home base of the 10th Ward and moved out from there.
It's like on Christmas when you open up a present that has to be put together. You know, if you got to make one, it probably takes an hour, but the second one probably only takes 10 minutes, you know what I mean?
Even though workers are still getting up to full speed, the company eventually hopes to land contracts in other cities to keep the facility busy for many years to come.
We haven't built trains here in Chicago for many decades now, and to be a part of a team and a company that's making trains from scratch that'll actually be running on the CTA lines, it's almost unbelievable. It's surreal.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
After production and testing, the first of the new 7000 series rail cars are on track to go into regular service next year. They'll eventually make up about half of the CTA's fleet. And up next, the British are coming. A fresh look at the Revolutionary War. Brandis Friedman in a new conversation recorded just before she left for the summer on family leave.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Award-winning historian and former journalist Rick Atkinson spent 15 years researching and writing his highly acclaimed World War II Liberation trilogy. Now, Atkinson has turned his gaze and considerable talents to another historical trilogy, this one on the Revolutionary War. The first volume, out now, is called The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington to Princeton, 1775 to 1777. Rick Atkinson joins us now. He's earned the Pulitzer Prize 3 times, both for his work at the Washington Post, where he worked for a quarter century, as well as his work as a historian. Welcome to Chicago Tonight, Rick.
Thanks, Brandis.
So after the success of the World War II Liberation trilogy, what made you decide that you wanted to focus on the Revolutionary War?
Yeah, well, the obvious thing would have been to turn to the Pacific and do for that theater what I'd done for the Mediterranean and Western Europe, but I would have had to start the war over again with Pearl Harbor or even earlier, and that didn't have any appeal. And the revolution has had a grip on my imagination since I was a kid. It tells us who we are, where we came from, what our forebears believed, and really the most profound question any people can ask themselves, what they were willing to die for. So I just decided that the time was right to do a battle history of our first war, which is also our creation story.
Are there parts of that history that we're collectively forgetting or misunderstanding about the Revolutionary War?
I think there's a lot. For one thing, it's a civil war, and it's pretty bloody. It's pretty nasty. It foreshadows the Civil War of the 19th century. So you have perhaps 20% of Americans who are still loyal to the crown, to King George III, and they're reluctant to throw in with the armed insurrection, and that aspect of the war is really nasty for 8 years. I think the difficulties that the British are having in waging war for 8 years across 3,000 miles of open ocean in the age of sail is underappreciated by a lot of people. Why would the king do that? Blood, treasure, and so on. And it's partly because George III is convinced that if the American colonies slip away, then Ireland will be next, Canada, the Sugar Islands in the West Indies, India, and that will be the end of the British Empire, which was newly created in 1763 with the winnings that they had after the 7 Years' War. And he's just not going to let it happen. And so 8 years of war, he's willing to send most of his army, most of his Royal Navy to try and keep us in the fold.
So this is the first volume of what you're calling the Revolution Trilogy. It takes us from 1775 to 1777. What was the story or the narrative that you really wanted to get out in this first volume?
I want to tell it from both sides. I want you to come away as a reader understanding the British perspective as well as the American perspective. It's character driven. It's always about character for me in writing history and the narrative of history. And I want the reader to have an appreciation for the sacrifice, the agony, really, of waging war that's also civil war, that's an insurrection against the mother country. We have 2.5 million people in America in 1775 when the revolution begins. 500,000 of them are black slaves. I want people to understand the role that they played in this. I want them to understand that the rebels, the patriots, are fighting not just for independence for themselves, they're fighting to keep 500,000 people enslaved, and that's important to remember.
You also have a narrative style of writing, and you mentioned that that your books are character driven with an impressive amount of detail and research. How did you go about researching for this book?
Well, for example, I went to Windsor Castle in England, and that's where the papers of our last king, George III, are kept. The Queen, Elizabeth II, owns those papers. In 2016, she opened them up for the first time to scholars. I was one of the first allowed in for a month. Every day I would climb the 102 stone steps and 21 wooden stairs to the garret of the Round Tower begun by William the Conqueror in the 11th century. And there are the papers. And George was his own secretary until late in life when he began to go blind. He wrote not only his correspondence and his lists by himself, he made the copies himself. And you have a real tactile sense of being in his presence. And it gives you insights into what he was thinking, what the British ministries were thinking, why they would wage this long, bloody war against their own people. So that's one place where I started. And then there are archives all over the country, really, that have bits and pieces of this, bits and pieces of it that haven't really been found before.
We hear a lot, obviously, about the bloodiness of the Civil War, and you describe in great detail. You said this is a war book. You talk about the bloodiness of the war, both from the British and the American perspectives. What was the fighting really like?
It's personal, it's close, it's nasty. A lot of it's with the bayonet. It's a terrible way to kill somebody. Part of that is because muskets are so inaccurate. Over 50 yards, you're probably not going to hit what you're aiming at. I think to have a complete understanding of what war is like in the 18th century, you have to appreciate that 25,000 Americans died during the Revolution. It's a higher percentage of our population than any war other than the Civil War in our national history. 100,000 people in North America between 1775 and 1782 died of smallpox. Disease is awful. 18th century medicine is primitive. It's a nasty way to win your independence.
So we've all heard the cry, of course, no taxation without representation, but obviously the story is more complex than that. How did the colonists go from, loyal subjects of the British Empire to revolutionaries and rebels and Americans? Yeah, they felt put upon over a course of years. Britain is trying to recoup some of the money that they had spent on the 7 Years' War, which was very expensive for them. They decided to impose taxes for the first time in earnest on the rebels, on the Americans. The Americans, for 150 years, basically been left alone. They don't like this. They reject it. Some of the taxes are rescinded, then more taxes are put on, a tax on tea, for example. It's over the course of a decade leading up to gunplay in 1775. It's bit by bit, two countries, two peoples who have grown apart over time are completely sundered. And when those first shots are fired on April 19, 1775, really the breach is then irreparable. You write that the American colonists had developed a belief in government by consent, which is a pretty radical idea at the time. How'd that come into being? Yeah.
Well, you know, the individual colonies had basically had their own assemblies, their own local governments over time, and they were accustomed to governing themselves. Parliament left them alone. Many Americans had no idea what Parliament was, or really did not acknowledge the legitimacy of Parliament in the sense that it didn't control my life in Massachusetts or Georgia or South Carolina. So the fact that the British were unwilling to allow the rebels, as they became, the ability to continue governing themselves, to make decisions about their everyday lives in a way that they had somewhat become accustomed to, is really the cause for political rupture.
We're almost out of time, but what can we expect from volumes 2 and 3?
More war, because the war gets more and more intense. It's bloodier. It's really quite awful, and character. It's about character. It's about George Washington and Benedict Arnold and Nathaniel Greene, and on the British side, the Howe brothers and the King. It really is a wonderful story that is about the growth of character.
Any lessons from the founding of the country that you think still resonate with us today?
I think one thing, you know, we were born bickering. Disputation is in the national genome. That's something important to remember when it seems as though we cannot have a civil dialogue in this country. I think it's also important to remember that regardless of how difficult we think our troubles today, we've had it much worse in the past, and we have managed to surmount those difficulties. We've overcome them. We've shown strength of character. We've found the leaders to help us find our way. So I think that those are important things to draw out of our national history.
And as a point of historical clarification, the book is titled, of course, The British Are Coming, and many of us are taught to believe that someone said that at some point. What does history tell you?
Paul Revere probably never said the British are coming. It wouldn't have made any sense to people who thought of themselves in 1775 as still British. He probably yelled, the regulars are coming out, meaning the British Army. The British are coming, for me, is really what the book is about, because the British are coming big time. They're coming as an army, as a navy. They're coming to suppress this insurrection. They're coming to kill. They're coming to rape. It's a really brutal notion of an invading force coming. And so that may not be what Paul Revere yelled in the night on April 19, 1775, but it's really what the story is about.
Rick Atkinson, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.
And again, the book is called The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington to Princeton, 1775 to 1777. And you can read an excerpt on our website. And we're back with more right after this.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/dailybriefing and sign up.
The showboat Dixiana was briefly the toast of the 1930s Chicago theater scene, staging melodramas until its own story took a turn for the melodramatic. Geoffrey Baer is here with the tide-tossed tale of the Dixiana in tonight's Ask Geoffrey. Hi, Geoffrey.
Hello, Phil.
Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Let's get to our first question, and the question is, what is the history of the building at California and Belmont that has Immel State Bank inscribed on it? Is there an inheritance waiting there for me? And this is from Kristen Immel, who gives her address, the control room. Yes. Wait, this viewer's name sounds very familiar.
There she is in our control room, our own Kristen Immel. She's our very own line producer. Hi, Kristen. And yes, she's in our control room watching us right now. Kristen, I'm sorry to tell you, though, that although you share the name, I'm afraid you're going to have to keep your day job. The Immel...
Well, that's good for us.
It's good for us,
yes.
And she seems happy about it. The Immel State Bank was one of thousands of banks across the United States that closed in the banking panics of 1930 and 31 during the Great Depression. After some large banks failed, fears of other banks failing spread across the country, and ironically, that was often what caused the banks to close.
Well, if I remember my history correctly, wasn't that what FDR was referring to when he said, you know, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself?
That's right. That's exactly what he was talking about. Many banks that closed in 1931, actually many banks in general from this period, you'll notice looked kind of like Immel State Bank, like little Greek and Roman temples. in that sort of grand neoclassical style that was supposed to make them look steadfast and trustworthy.
And enduring.
And enduring.
So what happened to those buildings?
Yeah, well, so many have been torn down, but there are a few, like the Immel State Bank, that still survive, and we found a few of them. First of all, Immel State Bank, after it closed, that building became the Kelling Nut Company offices, and then in 1998 it became a banquet hall. Now this is about 2 miles southwest. The former Kimball Trust and Savings Loan in Logan Square is a medical clinic today.
Looks like the same architect, or certainly the same kind of style.
Look at this one, Phil. This is the
my.
Laramie State Bank in Austin, clad in exuberant terracotta. Unfortunately, this building's been vacant for some years and is now endangered due to deferred
Has kind of
maintenance.
a Mayan look, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. This right here is my favorite one. The most interesting reuse of a closed bank, the former Knoll State Bank building, built in 1919 at Milwaukee and North Avenue in Wicker Park. Since 2012, it's been the world's fanciest Walgreens. Check out this soaring ceiling, and look what comes into view here. This beautiful stained glass skylight, and then the best thing of all about this particular restored bank, right there, they've reused the bank vault. Today, it's where you can stock up on vitamins.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes, the vitamin vault.
Let's go to our next question, which comes from Logan Square.
Okay.
I have a photo of a row of 2 flats around Logan Boulevard and Diversey Avenue by the Chicago River. Another photo also shows the building housing Dutch Mill Candies and a showboat on the river. Who was the architect of the 2 flats, and when were they built?
And did you hear what the second half of that question was?
About
a showboat in the Chicago
yes.
River. So we got this question about the 2 flats, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Back up.
A showboat in the Chicago? Well, so we did look into the 2 flats. First of all, she was interested in them because they were all so uniform. So here's the picture in question from 1936, and you can see they're all lined up there, almost identical. We were not able to identify the architect of the 2 flats, but we do know that they were built around 1914, possibly as workers' housing, because there were a lot of industrial businesses in that area. That's according to Logan Square Preservation's Andrew Schneider. But I have to admit, Phil, I was much more interested in this. Look on the right side of the frame. Look, there is a showboat in the Chicago River. And I was more interested in this than in the 2 flats. We did actually, on an earlier Ask Geoffrey, you might remember a couple years ago, we did feature a different showboat in the Chicago River farther south by the Loop. I had never heard, however, of this one. So the Dixiana was a 200-foot-long reproduction of a Southern-style showboat built in 1932 up in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. This is it in the boatyard up there. Its owners hoped that this 1,000-seat showboat would become a mainstay in the Chicago theater scene, staging melodramas, but they ran into trouble right away when Mayor Anton Cermak banned the boat from docking in the Chicago River, saying that the city had enough shuttered theaters and adding a new one on a boat just didn't make any sense. But as you can see, it did come to Chicago. Appeals from the public got him to change his mind, and the Dixiana docked in the river. Picture this, that big showboat docked in the river between State and Dearborn in the fall of 1933. But the melodrama continues. Before putting on a single show, the city said that the vessel interfered with dumping snow into the river, and they ordered it moved. So the owners relocated it to that private dock at Diversey, which is where our viewer saw it in a picture, and there were other pictures of it that we found. So almost a year after arriving in Chicago, the Dixiana finally staged her first melodrama, No Mother to Guide Her, in August of 1934.
That's a production I'm sorry I missed, but so was it smooth sailing for the Dixiana after that?
No, the saga continues. Even though they sold out many shows, it just wasn't enough to keep the business afloat, and the owners filed for bankruptcy in just over a year. And so then the defunct showboat sat there at Diversey Avenue. There it is again. Finally, about a year and a half later, new owners took the show on the road, or actually on the water. About a year and a half later, they planned this Great Lakes tour starting in Michigan City, Indiana with the play Tobacco Road. But after a rough crossing, getting across the lake, the boat literally began to burst at the seams upon arrival and half sank in Michigan City's harbor, delaying shows until it could be repaired. The play did open a month later in June of 1937. But then it only ran a few months before a U.S. Naval Reserve boat accidentally rammed it. This is terrible, leaving a gaping hole in the hull. By the time the boat was repaired and ready for performances, the forlorn cast had split town seeking fairer pastures.
They probably thought they were in a production of Voyage of the Damned.
They probably did. They all went off to New York to look for work. The show did go on with a new cast, but the hull reopened a few months later, and this 5-year-old vessel was finally scrapped.
Oh my gosh, it just sounds like a bad luck from Jump Street, as
Absolutely.
they say. Geoffrey, thank you.
My pleasure.
We've got a few more bank buildings for you to check out on our website, plus where to find historical photos of some Chicago street intersections like the one in the Dixiata story. And while you're there, deposit your own questions about Chicago and make a withdrawal on the knowledge bank of Geoffrey Baer. Do it quick before there's a run on that bank.
Ask Geoffrey is made possible in part by BMO Harris Bank.
What? Oh no. I have suspicious activity on my debit card. Now what?
You know. Sorry. With BMO Harris, you can just freeze your card right from your phone.
Wow, really?
Yeah. You can unfreeze it too.
How many roommates do you have?
That feeling you get when a bank puts security at your fingertips. That's the BMO effect.
Again, that was an encore presentation of Ask Geoffrey you just saw. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also watch via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Former clerks weigh in on the Supreme Court's biggest decisions this term. And the multi-million-dollar art gallery in a suburban junior high school. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and